Thank you, Nick, for that kind introduction. It's great to be here. Nick didn't mention that he and I actually worked together in the early days, like the very first days of the Bush administration. I was the Deputy Director for Congressional Relations for the transition. He was the incoming Assistant President for Legislative Affairs. And we probably spent 3 weeks together, but it was one of the sort of the most fulfilling professional experiences I've ever had in my life. So it's great to be here, great to be among old friends. I also want to thank Mark House. Mark is not here, but he's the CFO of the FAA. He came over early days to be part of our team at the NEC as a detailee, and he has been instrumental in pulling together kind of the president's plan on ATC reform. So just remind you something that you all know. I mean, aviation is a critical component of our nation's economy and of our nation's infrastructure. The air traffic control system is one of the most important and vibrant elements of our nation's infrastructure. Each year, aviation contributes about $1.5 trillion to our economy, and every day, 2.6 million people travel the skies. But the process can be very much an anxiety-producing process for travelers. Flying feels increasingly sort of like the lottery, but not in a good way, because you're not sure, is my plane going to be on time? Is it going to be delayed? If it's delayed, is it going to be canceled? If it's delayed, am I miss my connecting flight? Are my bags going to make a transition? So there's a fair amount of anxiety that comes with flying today. In fact, I'll never forget, in my prior role at Macquarie, I used to travel 3 to 4 days a week. And once I was sitting on an airplane, and the lady sitting next to me, the pilot had been announcing, that there's going to be a delay, there's going to be an additional delay. He announced the last 15 minutes, we're going to be another 15 minutes delay, and she broke down in tears because she was now going to miss her connecting flight for the funeral of her best friend, right? And so we've all sort of been there and frustrated with the timing of flying, and ATC reform is not going to fix this problem, but the president thinks it's the most important thing we can do to take a step in the right direction. So we need to start somewhere. And reforming the air traffic control system is the right place to start. We're challenged with delays that impact productivity, and we're also challenged with ATC being part of the government that we have government reform and procurement rules that kick in and can be complicated. So delays are major drivers of inefficiencies of the NAS. Airlines for America, in fact, this group calculates that in 2016, there were almost 500,000 delays, averaging almost an hour each, representing an overall cost of $1.8 billion to passengers. So passengers are losing $1.8 billion a year, attributable just directly to delays. Short delays are vexing and can be complicated, but sometimes these delays can ripple out if they're longer and affect entire regions. The New York airspace is a good example of this, where that entire airspace can start slowing down as a result of longer delays. And that results in lost productivity. So let me point out also that one of the challenges we have with the current system, the fact that it's embedded in FAA, is FAA is obviously a government agency, and like every government agency has to comply with procurement rules, and these procurement rules can be very, very long. They're very fair, but they can take a very long period of time. And in fact, Paul Rinaldi, early in this debate, was talking to me, he's the president of NATCA, was talking to me about the challenges of that procurement process, and when he looks north of the border, his Canadian equivalents, in essence, are using iPhones, the equivalent of iPhone for air traffic control technology, and he's stuck with the flip phone. And that's not because he wouldn't like the iPhone, it's just that that procurement process for technology is so long that by the time it's done, the technology he gets is already outdated. So we want to fix that. So those are some problems with the system. One thing that is not a problem with the system, which is good, and that is safety, right? The air traffic control system is the safest in the world, but we can make it even safer. And ATC reform would make it even safer because we would be separating the operator from the regulator. In most industries, we don't have an operator and regulator in the same institution, and we think separating those out, albeit the fact that airline travel is extremely safe today, would make it even safer. So what we want to do is we want to have reform that fixes these problems. And so we want to pursue next-gen technology without a budget challenge, right? Delays can be reduced and productivity improved by technology, but an air traffic control operator needs access to stable and sufficient funding to make those improvements. And if you just look at the funding that Congress has given over the last 5 or 6 years for aviation and for air traffic control in particular, it's all over the map. They fund it high, then it comes low, then it comes back again, then there's a sequester, so it dips again. And no sensible organization developing technology can live in this world with just highly unpredictable revenue. So the FAA has been endured 26 short-term extensions, right, over the last 10 years. 26, later this month, it'll be 27, right? And it still hasn't received a full budget on time in 20 years. So imagine you're trying to run a business, and it's a technology and operations business. You've not received a full budget on time in 20 years of your business. So moving this to another nonprofit entity will address those concerns. And finally, financing of the new entity is sort of the best part. So this new entity will not be receiving US taxpayer dollars. It will be financed solely on user fees paid for by some of the users. So who's for this idea? Well, obviously, the major airlines. A4A has been very much in favor of this. We've done a phenomenal job in educating the public on this. The largest union representing air traffic controllers. So think about that. I mean, that's one of the things that caught me on this issue early on. You have a public employee union who's saying, please privatize my agency. I can't think anywhere else in the country where a public employee union is saying, hey, listen, things are so bad right now. And I don't mean to make the FAA sound like they're underperforming. The FAA is doing a phenomenal job, given the constraints that they're under. But still, its performance is so below where it could be that the public employee union is saying, let's privatize this. So pilots are for it, businesses are for it, passengers are for it, and the last 3 CEOs of the FAA Air Traffic Control Organization is for it. This is not a new idea. This, I think, initially was put forward by Dorothy Robine in the Clinton administration, so it's been around for decades. It's been supported by both Republicans and Democrats. It's not a partisan idea. But we're excited because no other time in history have so many things lined up in favor of this proposal. So obviously the president is very much in favor of this. We had a special event in the White House where he signed the principles that we transmitted to the Hill calling for air traffic control reform. House Speaker's Office, House leadership is in favor of it. Chairman Schuster, the House T&I Committee, has been an enormously effective proponent of this. So we have lots of people lined up in favor of it. But let's talk about who's opposed to this. Corporate jets and general aviation oppose reform out of a fear of having to pay additional fees or losing access to airspace and airports. So I grew up in this area, and so I know Washington well. And this is one of the things I love about Washington. So you have an idea, and the people that are paying for the new idea like it, and the people who actually aren't incurring a cost don't like it. And I can't imagine anywhere else where we're going to have a brand new system, someone else is going to pay for it, but the business jets are still opposed to doing this. And so it's been a bit of a mystery as to why that's the case, because we had a whole series of meetings with general aviation collectively and individually, essentially asking them on behalf of the president, what is it that you would like to see as part of our proposal that would make you feel comfortable? And there were 2 concerns they had. They were concerned about access to airspace, and they were concerned about fees. And so we said, okay, so fantastic. So if we put in the language that you don't pay any fees, and that we can't restrict access to airspace, will you support the proposal? No. Like, okay, what can we put in the language? Like, what can we put in there? Well, we just don't like it, because the organization might do something in the future. It's like, well, this is an organization created by Congress, and so we're going to write a law that tells them what they can do and can't do. So what would you like them to do, what you want not like them to do? We just don't like the concept. So we could literally never get past that feedback loop. But if you look in the Schuster bill, the general aviation and corporate aviation pays no fees, and the new entity would not be allowed to restrict their access to airspace. So what's being proposed, again, we're going to separate ATC into a nonprofit corporation that would be independent from government, but regulated from a safety standpoint by the FAA, would be responsible for its own self-sufficiency, be free to make the best decisions on behalf of the traveling public and the NAS, and this, as a nonprofit, this entity would only charge what it needs to operate. They would be investing in service and technology with a focus on customers, and this focus would increase capacity, reduce delays, shorten flight times, save fuel, and enable faster and more proactive responses to events like weather. So that's what we're proposing and what's being proposed. I think it's important to understand what we're not proposing. I mentioned already, we are not proposing putting fees on all users. The Schuster bill does not have that in there. And the Secretary of Transportation has an obligation to enforce this provision, so the new entity would not be able to impose fees as a matter of law. We are not limiting access, again in the Schuster bill, and we are not creating national security problems. So one of my favorite parts of this debate was there was a concern among some that if we have this separate entity, that will somehow impair the nation's security. And so we called up Secretary Mattis and said, would you mind calling Chairman Thornberry and saying, as the Secretary of Defense, that this proposal will not impair national security? And he said, are you kidding me? Like, I've got to call the chairman and say the president's proposal doesn't negatively impact national security? And say, yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, you actually need to make that call because rumors are rampant that somehow this is going to impact our national security. So, so the call was made, and DOD has been supportive of this. We're also not doing something that's untested. Our neighbors to the north, NAV Canada, blazed a similar trail 20 years ago, and for many of the same reasons we are experiencing today. By the way, general aviation is alive and well in Canada today. NAV Canada has streamlined their operation, recapitalized their system, made a number of very beneficial changes, but most importantly, and I think this is really important metric, today their rates are 3% lower. In nominal terms, their rates are 3% lower when they were introduced in 1999, and they're more than 40% lower in inflation-adjusted dollars. So in real dollars, the rates in Canada today are 40% lower, yet we're concerned about utilizing this tool here in America because we're concerned about maybe irrational fees being kicked in. So it's also important to note the Schuster bill does not restrict AIP or EAS funding. So I think the chairman has done a phenomenal job of listening to all parties, of shaping this package in a way that addresses all legitimate concerns. In fact, last night I was talking to the Speaker's office, and it looks like the vote count in the House is looking very, very good. And then when we get into the first couple weeks of October, there'll be a vote, and anticipating right now that it will be successful in the House. So this is really all about improving the customer experience, as Nick mentioned. Air traffic control is a 24/7, 365-day operation. Government is just not simply structured to keep up with technology for procurement and for budgetary reasons I touched on earlier. Incremental reform inside the government has tried, but been tried with mixed results. I think the FAA actually has done a very admirable job in the last decade of trying to move next-gen along, but again, they're facing constraints, both budgetary and government procurement, that are beyond their control. And the proposed not-for-profit, non-governmental, self-sufficient model has been tested and implemented with excellent results by NAV Canada. We invented aviation in this country. We can regain our innovative competitive edge by getting government out of the way. We can't keep waiting for a solution, and we should no longer accept excuses for delaying what needs to be done now. So with that, let me finish by just thanking A4A, thanking others that have been very involved in this debate and educating the public. Again, the President thinks that the best way for us to address aviation congestion in this country is to enact ATC reform and to do it as quickly as possible. So thanks again for your attention.